Thanksgiving has always been a family tradition, a time to gather, give thanks, and celebrate with loved ones. But for me, it had become something I dreaded. Every year my father would stand up, raise a glass, and praise my older brother for his success and responsibility, his impressive career as a lawyer, his perfect life. Meanwhile, I'd quietly sit at the table, listening to my accomplishments get overshadowed, my life and career dismissed. This year, I thought, maybe it would be different. Maybe I would finally get the recognition I deserved. But when I flew to Miami for my family's annual Thanksgiving dinner, I heard the same old speech from my father. "Your sister is successful and responsible," he said, gesturing to my brother. "She makes us proud. But you?" The laughter rang out around the table as my father's words trailed off. I'd heard it all before, but this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. I was tired of being the joke in my family's eyes. I had worked hard, built my life, and had earned my place. Tonight, I was going to show them exactly who I was, and what happened next would change everything. The Thanksgiving dinner started like it always did. My parents' house in Miami was filled with the delicious smells of roasted turkey and mashed potatoes, the clatter of plates, and the chatter of relatives catching up after a long year. My heart raced as I entered the familiar space, trying to push down the anxiety that always accompanied family gatherings. The laughter echoed in the air, but it felt distant, almost like I wasn't fully part of the picture. My brother, Liam, had already made himself the center of attention, as usual. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, chatting animatedly with cousins I hadn't seen in years, his voice carrying that confident edge that came so naturally to him. He always knew how to be the perfect son, the one who had it all together, the successful doctor, the model for responsibility and achievement. I could feel the weight of my family's expectations bearing down on me, like I always did during these dinners. I had spent years building a solid career in Manhattan, worked my way up in retail sales, paid my bills, and managed to carve out a life on my own, but it never seemed enough. As my parents joined us at the dinner table, my father began his usual speech. I braced myself, knowing exactly what was coming. His pride in Liam was so evident it almost hurt. It was as if my accomplishments didn't even exist. I tried to smile, pretending it didn't sting. "Your brother is successful and responsible," my dad began, beaming at Liam as if the words could never capture enough of his pride. "He makes us proud every day. He's the kind of son anyone would want." I glanced at Liam, standing tall and confident in the spotlight. He was already on the verge of launching into one of his tales about his work, probably a story about saving a patient or leading some groundbreaking medical research. I could already feel my frustration growing. Every year, this was the same. Liam was always the golden child, the one everyone fawned over. It didn't matter that I had put in my own blood, sweat, and tears to get where I was. And then, like clockwork, my father turned to me. "But you, Fina," he said, his voice filled with a dismissive edge. "You're still figuring things out, huh?" The room burst into laughter, and my face flushed. I smiled stiffly, but it didn't reach my eyes. This wasn't the first time, and it probably wouldn't be the last. It was the same every year my brother, the doctor, constantly held up as the epitome of success, while my hard work was reduced to a joke. I could feel the sting of the words settle in my chest, but I kept my composure. It wasn't the first time my father had made comments like this. It wasn't even the first time the whole family had laughed at me. It was a pattern I had come to accept, though it always left me with a deep, gnawing sense of inadequacy. This time, though, something inside me snapped. I had heard enough. I had been silent for far too long, accepting this cruel tradition year after year. "Yeah, I'm figuring things out, Dad," I said, forcing the words out, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I'm doing just fine." Liam raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued, but didn't say anything. My mother, who always seemed to side with Liam, gave me a sympathetic smile. "Of course you're doing fine, sweetie," she said. "You just have a different path. Not everyone is cut out for a career like Liam's." I nodded, feeling the familiar sting of being put into a category. In my mother's eyes, my career in retail would always be seen as secondary to Liam's accomplishments, no matter how much I had worked to get to where I was. I had earned promotions, built a career in Manhattan, and lived independently, all things that should have been acknowledged. But here I was, once again, reduced to figuring things out. The conversation moved on, and I tried my best to stay present, smiling along with the family, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was invisible to them. I could see Liam out of the corner of my eye, basking in the attention as always. My mind wandered, replaying the last few years of my life, my job, my accomplishments, my independence, and yet none of it mattered to my family. To them, I was still the less successful sibling, still living in the shadow of my brother's seemingly perfect life. I tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on the meal in front of me, but I couldn't help but feel the weight of it, all the years of comparison, the constant validation my brother received, and my own achievements that were never fully recognized. It wasn't just the comments, it was the fact that they never saw me for who I truly was. They never understood the sacrifices I had made to get where I was. As dessert was served, I felt a shift within me, a sudden determination. I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. I wasn't going to let them laugh at me, to dismiss me like I didn't matter. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The moment of truth was coming, and I was ready to face it. No more holding back. It was time for me to stand up for myself for the first time in my life. The dinner table was alive with chatter, clinking silverware, and the comforting smells of roasted turkey and homemade stuffing. The sound of laughter filled the room, and for a moment, it felt like any other Thanksgiving gathering. I watched as my father, who had always been the voice of authority in our family, stood up to give his customary toast. He'd done this every year, just as predictable as the mashed potatoes on the table, and I braced myself for the same speech. "There's one thing I always enjoy most about these dinners," my dad began, his deep voice booming with pride, "and that's sharing how proud I am of my son, Liam." Liam, seated at the head of the table, flashed a smile as wide as the horizon. His usual calm confidence never wavered. He was the picture of success, tall, well-dressed, a well-respected doctor with the perfect life. And just like every other year, the moment the spotlight was on him, everyone in the room leaned in, eager to hear about his latest achievements. "Liam has worked so hard," my dad continued, lifting his glass and nodding toward my brother. "He's responsible, successful, and has done so much for this family. We couldn't be prouder of him. He's exactly the kind of man anyone would want as a son." I felt a familiar ache in my chest, a tightness that I had long learned to ignore. I could feel the tension building in my body, but I refused to let it show. After all, I'd endured this for years. Liam being the golden child, always first to be praised, always the one to get the spotlight. I had spent so many years working hard, living in the shadow of his success, but for some reason, none of that seemed to matter to my family. As my father went on and on about Liam's unbelievable work ethic and selfless contributions to the world of medicine, I fought the urge to roll my eyes. My jaw clenched. Of course, Liam's life was perfect. He had everything anyone could want. A prestigious career, a beautiful house, a thriving marriage. And for all that, my family couldn't seem to see the things I had accomplished, the sacrifices I had made, or the independence I had built on my own. But then came the inevitable. My turn. My dad paused, his eyes drifting across the table, settling on me with a quick, almost dismissive glance before he continued. "And then there's you, Fina," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "Well, you're doing all right. We're happy you're happy." His words hung in the air like a thick fog. The tension in my chest grew into a deep knot in my stomach. I felt every ounce of attention shift away from me, and my heart sank as the laughter from the family echoed in my ears. It was a small, quick chuckle, a few snickers here and there, as if they were all in on some private joke I wasn't a part of. I could feel the eyes on me, my cousins, my aunts, uncles, all of them now looking away, shifting uncomfortably. And there it was again, that feeling of being invisible, of never quite measuring up, of being the one who had to make do with the scraps while everyone else took the feast. The laughter stung in a way words never could. It was the culmination of years of feeling dismissed, of working hard, only for my accomplishments to be brushed off. The dismissiveness in my father's voice was like a slap, a reminder that no matter what I had achieved in my career, it would never be enough for them. It wasn't just about the lack of recognition, it was about how easily they could ignore my hard work and pretend I was just doing all right. No applause, no praise, just a, "Well, she's fine, I guess." I glanced around the room, feeling my face flush. I knew they didn't mean to hurt me, at least, not consciously, but the years of passive neglect and comparisons to Liam had worn me thin. The laughter felt like a final straw, the emotional weight of it all suddenly too much to bear. I wasn't just frustrated, I was furious. I had spent too many years trying to fit into a family dynamic that was never going to accept me as I was. This had gone on long enough. The frustration inside me started to rise, bubbling to the surface. I wasn't going to let this continue. I had worked hard, far harder than most people realized, and I was tired of being the second choice, the backup. The rage I had kept buried for years now surged forward, and the decision to stand up for myself became clear. No more. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Liam was still grinning as if he hadn't noticed the subtle shift in the room, as if he hadn't realized how much his success overshadowed everything else. My dad continued to speak about how proud he was of Liam's career, but my ears were ringing. All I could hear was the echo of those dismissive words. "Well, you're doing all right." In a split second, my body tensed, and the words I had been holding back for so long spilled out. "You know what, Dad?" I said, the anger in my voice barely contained. "I am doing more than all right." The table fell silent, and everyone turned to look at me. Liam's smile faltered for just a moment, and my father's expression shifted, puzzled. My heart pounded in my chest, but I stood my ground. "I've built a life for myself, a life you don't seem to recognize. I work in retail in Manhattan, yes, but I've worked my way up promotions, achievements, independence. I've made my own way without anyone's help, and I'm proud of that." The room remained quiet. My mom opened her mouth as if to speak, but I wasn't finished. "You keep praising Liam for his successes, as if it's the only kind that matters. But I'm successful too. I've made my own path, I've overcome challenges, and I'm not going to sit here and let you dismiss everything I've done just because it doesn't look like what you want it to look like." The silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke. Liam, who had been the center of attention just moments ago, was now looking down at his plate. My father's face reddened, but I could see the flicker of realization in his eyes. This wasn't the meek Fina he was used to, the one who always took the back seat, the one who let the jokes slide. No, this was a different version of me, a version that had finally had enough. The laughter had turned to discomfort. My parents didn't know how to handle it, and neither did the rest of the family. In that moment, I didn't care about their reactions. I wasn't going to hide anymore, and I wasn't going to let my brother's spotlight dim my own accomplishments. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. I wasn't the punchline of the joke. I wasn't the one left in the shadows. And as the room slowly began to settle back into uneasy silence, I realized that standing up for myself was the first step in breaking free from the expectations that had held me captive for so long. It was time for a change, and that change had started right here, right now. Fina's heart raced as the laughter from her family filled the air, the echo of her father's dismissive comment still ringing in her ears. It felt like the weight of her entire life was pressing down on her years of working hard, achieving things that mattered to her, but never receiving the recognition she deserved. Every year, every Thanksgiving, the same scenario played out, and Fina had always quietly accepted it. But this year, something inside her shifted. She could feel the frustration, the anger, and the resentment building up inside her like a pressure cooker ready to explode. She couldn't keep doing this. She couldn't keep sitting quietly, pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. The familiar ache in her chest, the one that had been there for years, felt like a raw wound now, one that she had finally reached the limit of. Fina took a slow, steadying breath, trying to calm the raging emotions threatening to overtake her. This wasn't just about being dismissed by her father or ignored by her family. This was about finally standing up for herself. This was about taking back the dignity that had been stripped away from her in front of her own family. "This is it," she thought, her internal dialogue clear and resolute. "I'm done being quiet. I'm done being invisible." She glanced around the room, noticing the casual glances her relatives exchanged as her father continued to sing Liam's praises. Everyone seemed so used to this routine. Fina was the outlier, the one who always held back, never voicing her frustration, never making waves. But today, things would be different. Her palms were slightly clammy as she gripped the edge of the table. Liam, sitting across from her, seemed blissfully unaware of what was happening beneath the surface. He was too busy basking in the praise, responding to their admiration with his usual smugness. Fina's breath hitched as she looked at her brother. He had always been the golden child, the perfect son, and yet, here she was, a successful woman in her own right, finally ready to take the spotlight back. Fina cleared her throat, catching the attention of the room. "Actually, she began, her voice firm, but not loud. "I think it's time I say something." The chatter at the table slowed. Her father's voice faltered slightly, as he looked at her with mild surprise. Fina stood up, her legs slightly shaky beneath her, but her resolve was unwavering. For the first time in her life, she was going to speak her truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made her family. She wasn't going to let them continue to treat her like the afterthought, the one whose achievements were always secondary to Liam's. "I'm tired of this," she said, looking directly at her father, then sweeping her gaze across the table. "I'm tired of hearing every year how amazing Liam is, how successful he is, how responsible he is, while I'm the one who gets brushed aside." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, the laughter and chatter at the table died down. The weight of her statement settled over them like a thick blanket. Fina paused, swallowing hard, her heart pounding in her chest, but she wasn't going to stop. Not now. "I've worked just as hard, if not harder, to build my life. I've worked my way up in retail sales in Manhattan, a city where you have to fight for every ounce of success. I'm independent. I've paid my own bills, built my own career, and I'm living a life that I'm proud of," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Her family stared at her, eyes wide in shock, as they processed what she was saying. This was not the quiet, passive Fina they were used to. This was a woman who had finally found her voice. "For years, I've let this family treat me as if I don't measure up," Fina continued, the hurt in her voice now mingling with a new sense of strength. "But I've earned every step I've taken. I've worked for everything I have, and it's time for you all to recognize that." Liam's smile had slowly faded as Fina spoke, his eyes now flicking nervously between her and the others in the room. For once, Fina wasn't the one who was invisible. She wasn't the one being ignored, laughed at, or dismissed. "I don't need you to tell me I'm doing all right," Fina said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I need you to see me for who I am, someone who has worked hard, who has built her life from the ground up, and who deserves the same respect and recognition as anyone else in this family." The room was dead silent now. Fina's parents exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of surprise and guilt. For once, they were forced to face the reality of their favoritism, the years of neglect they had shown Fina, and the ways they had dismissed her accomplishments. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Liam shifted in his seat uncomfortably, his previously confident demeanor now replaced by a look of confusion and unease. "Fina, I didn't mean it like that," he stammered, his usual self-assuredness faltering for the first time. I don't know what you're talking about." "We never what?" Fina cut him off sharply, her eyes piercing. "You never saw me? You never cared about the work I did? You never thought I was enough?" Liam opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence spoke volumes. Fina turned back to her parents, her voice more steady now, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "You've always treated him like the prize, the successful one, but that doesn't make me any less successful, any less capable. I've earned everything I have. And it's time you stop pretending that only one of us is worthy of recognition." The family was still reeling from Fina's words. They had never seen her like this before, so assertive, so unapologetic. The tension was palpable, and Fina knew there was no turning back now. But she didn't care. She had spent too many years being overshadowed, too many years accepting their dismissive attitudes. Tonight, she was taking control of her narrative. The silence that followed was deafening, but Fina wasn't done yet. She had one final point to make. "You want to know the real reason I've been overlooked?" Fina asked, her voice calm but with an undeniable edge. "Because I didn't live up to your expectations. Because I didn't follow the path you wanted me to. But that's not my fault. That's yours. You never took the time to see what I've accomplished, never bothered to recognize my efforts. And that's on you, not me." The room remained still, no one daring to speak. Fina, now standing tall, felt the weight of the years of frustration finally lift from her shoulders. She had said it all, and she wasn't going to take it back. For the first time, she felt free from the shackles of comparison, free from the need for validation from people who had never truly seen her. This was her moment, and she was going to make sure they never forgot it. The silence that followed Fina's words was heavy, a blanket of tension that smothered the room. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped her revelation about her career, her independence, and the years of neglect by her family hanging in the air. But Fina knew this wasn't enough. She wasn't finished. The truth she had been holding inside for years needed to be fully exposed. The truth about Liam, about the lies he had told the family, the financial struggles he had hidden, and the image of success he had carefully curated for so long. For years, Fina had quietly watched as Liam was elevated to a pedestal, praised for his perfect life as a doctor. But she knew the reality was different. She had seen the warning signs, the erratic behavior, the unexplained absences, the vague answers when questions about his finances came up, and, for the first time in her life, Fina was ready to lay it all out in front of her family. "You want to talk about success and responsibility?" Fina said, her voice steady, yet full of the conviction that had been brewing inside her for years. "Then let me tell you the truth about Liam." Her eyes locked, with Liam's, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of fear in his gaze. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Fina wasn't about to back down now. "I've known for a while, Liam," she continued, her tone calm but cutting, "about your debt, about the failed investments, about the lies you've been feeding everyone." The room went silent again. The murmurs stopped, and every eye in the room turned to Fina. The family, who had always been in awe of Liam's supposed success, now seemed unsure of what to make of what Fina had just said. "Liam has been hiding this from all of you," Fina said, her voice growing stronger. "He's been drowning in debt for years. His medical practice isn't the cash cow you think it is. He's been borrowing money from Mom and Dad, from friends, trying to stay afloat while presenting this image of perfection." Liam's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words failed him. Fina had struck a nerve. She could see the panic rising in his eyes. The confident, perfect image he had built was crumbling right in front of him. "You've made them all believe you've got it all figured out, Liam," Fina continued. "But the reality is, you've been making terrible financial decisions for years. Your investments in real estate have failed. Your credit card debt is out of control, and yet you've been able to keep up this facade of success. But the truth is, you've been hiding it, keeping it from everyone, especially Mom and Dad." Liam's face flushed with anger, and he stood up abruptly, shaking his head. "That's not true, Fina," he snapped. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't have any idea about my life or what I've been dealing with." Fina stood her ground. "I know enough," she said firmly. "I know you've been borrowing money from them for years. You've been using their savings to prop up your failing business ventures. You've been playing everyone, pretending like you're the golden child, the perfect son, while the truth is, you're just as flawed as the rest of us." Liam's eyes darted around the room, looking for support, but none came. His face was a mixture of frustration and fear, and for the first time, he wasn't the one in control of the room. Fina had exposed him for who he truly was, no longer the flawless doctor, the family's golden boy, but just a man who had made bad choices and tried to cover them up with a smile and a good reputation. Fina's parents were silent. Her mother's face was a mask of confusion and shock, and her father's brow furrowed in discomfort. Neither of them spoke. They couldn't. The truth was too hard to ignore. They had spent years praising Liam, ignoring Fina's successes, all while turning a blind eye to the problems Liam had been hiding. The room was thick with discomfort. The relatives exchanged glances, some unsure of what to say, others looking at Fina with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Liam, his usual confident self, had shrunk in front of their eyes. For the first time, the truth was out. The golden boy wasn't as golden as they had believed. Fina felt a surge of power as she stood there, watching Liam flounder. She had always been the one who was overlooked, the one who wasn't good enough. But now, she had turned the tables. She had revealed the truth, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Liam opened his mouth to say something, but Fina didn't give him the chance. "You've been hiding behind this image of perfection for so long, Liam," she said. "But the truth is, you're just like the rest of us. You make mistakes. You've failed. And it's time everyone knows that." Liam looked down, his face burning with embarrassment. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked vulnerable. Fina saw him for who he really was: flawed, struggling, and human. She didn't hate him for it, but she couldn't let him continue to live the lie, using their family as a shield to protect himself from the consequences of his actions. The silence stretched on, but Fina felt stronger than she had in years. The facade had been shattered, and the truth was out. It wasn't about trying to tear Liam down or get revenge, it was about reclaiming her own dignity. She had finally spoken her truth, and in doing so, she had exposed the false image her brother had built. She had shattered the idealized version of him, and in the process, Fina realized she had also freed herself from the weight of living in his shadow. She wasn't just the overlooked daughter anymore. She was Fina, and for the first time in her life, she was in control. The room was eerily quiet after Fina's words hung in the air. The immediate shock of her revelation had left everyone momentarily stunned. But as the seconds ticked by, the tension began to bubble up. Her father was the first to speak, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Fina, we never meant," he started, his words faltering as he glanced nervously at Liam, who was now sitting with his hands clenched in his lap, looking down at the table. Fina, her arms crossed over her chest, remained standing, her posture firm. "What, Dad? You never meant to what? Treat me like I don't matter? Never meant to diminish my accomplishments while constantly elevating Liam as if he's the only one who's done anything worthy?" Her father's face flushed with discomfort, but he quickly covered it up with a sigh, his eyes flickering around the room as if searching for a way to fix things, to erase the growing tension. "We didn't realize how much we were hurting you, sweetheart. Liam's always been, well, you know, but that doesn't mean we didn't value what you've done." Fina felt a surge of frustration build inside her. It wasn't. The first time her parents had used words like, "we didn't realize," to absolve themselves of responsibility, as if their behavior over the years had been some sort of misunderstanding. She wasn't buying it anymore. "No," Fina replied, her voice steady but sharp. "You didn't realize because you never cared to. You always assumed I'd be fine in the background. But I'm not fine. I'm not invisible, and I'm not someone you can just overlook anymore." Her father opened his mouth to protest, but Fina held up her hand, cutting him off. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her into forgiving him without truly understanding the damage they had done. "I'm done," Fina said quietly. "Done with the comparisons. Done with the constant feeling of being less than. I don't need your apologies, not if they're only meant to smooth things over. I need you to understand how much this has hurt me, how much it's shaped who I've become." Liam, who had been eerily quiet up until this point, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Fina glanced at him, meeting his eyes for the first time since she'd spoken out. She saw the guilt there, but also the defensiveness. He wasn't used to being called out. For years, he had been the shining example of success, and now, with the truth laid bare, he didn't know how to respond. "Fina, I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Liam finally said, his voice low and strained. "You know how hard I've worked. I didn't ask for all this attention." "No, you didn't ask for it," Fina interrupted, the anger she'd been holding in for years finally seeping into her words. "But you sure as hell let it happen. You've played the part of the perfect son, the successful doctor, and I've watched while you've gotten all the praise, all the validation, while I've had to fight for even the smallest recognition. And I'm tired of being invisible, tired of being treated like my success doesn't matter." Liam sat back in his chair, looking like he had been punched in the gut. His hands were trembling now, his usual confidence slipping away. He couldn't argue with the truth, and Fina could see that. "Fina," her mother began, her voice soft but pleading, "we've always loved you. We just didn't know how much this was affecting you." Fina turned to her mother, the weight of years of emotional neglect weighing heavily on her shoulders. "Love isn't enough, Mom. I've heard that my whole life. But love doesn't make up for treating someone like they don't matter, like their hard work and achievements aren't worth acknowledging. I needed more than just love. I needed respect. And for once, I needed to hear that I've done something right." The emotional toll of what Fina was saying hit her like a wave. She felt drained, every word she spoke feeling like it was taking more out of her than she had anticipated. But at the same time, there was a sense of liberation growing inside her. For the first time in her life, she was speaking up, confronting her family with the truth that had been hidden, suppressed, and ignored for so long. It wasn't just about her brother's failures, it was about finally standing up for herself and putting an end to the family dynamic that had always put her last. Her parents sat in silence, exchanging a glance that spoke volumes, guilt, confusion, and perhaps, for the first time, realization. But it was too late for apologies. Fina knew that. She had been given the same promises for years, promises that her family would change, that they would see her, that they would finally understand. But every time, It was empty. Every time, their actions spoke louder than their words. The room remained heavy with tension, and Fina could feel the exhaustion settling in. She had done what she came to do, expose the truth, stand up for herself, and refuse to be diminished. But she could also feel the emotional toll of what it had cost her. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was the culmination of years of hurt, years of pretending to be okay with being treated as secondary. Fina stood there for a moment, looking around at the faces in the room. Her parents' expressions were a mix of regret and shock, but they hadn't truly understood until now. Liam's face was filled with guilt, but she could see that his world was crumbling, and he wasn't sure how to pick up the pieces. Without another word, Fina quietly turned and walked toward the door. The decision was made. She wasn't going to stay in this toxic environment any longer. She wasn't going to subject herself to their guilt-ridden apologies and empty promises. She had reclaimed her power, and now it was time to close the door on this chapter of her life. As she stepped out into the cool Miami air, Fina felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had said what needed to be said. She had exposed the truth, and she wasn't going to let it be ignored anymore. The weight that had hung over her for so long was finally gone. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their validation. For the first time in years, Fina felt free. And as she walked away, she knew there was no going back. She had made the right choice. No family could ever make her feel small again. The airplane touched down in Manhattan just as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting a warm golden hue over the city. Fina sat back in her seat, staring out the window at the city she had called home for years. It felt like a different world from the one she had left behind in Miami, one filled with family expectations, judgment, and years of being ignored. In the days that followed her Thanksgiving confrontation, Fina had felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Leaving her family's toxic dynamic had been liberating, but the emotional toll it had taken on her was undeniable. Now, back in the city that had always felt like a refuge, Fina knew she had to begin the process of rediscovering who she was beyond the family's constant comparison. For the first time, she was no longer living in the shadow of their expectations. The path ahead was hers to create. The first few days back in Manhattan were difficult, but Fina was determined to make the most of her newfound freedom. She had always been dedicated to her job in retail sales, but for the first time, she felt fully invested in her career, without the cloud of self-doubt that had plagued her for years. She had spent so much time trying to gain her family's approval, but now, she no longer cared about their validation. Instead, she focused on her professional growth, setting new challenges for herself and embracing opportunities that would push her outside her comfort zone. Fina found herself volunteering to lead new initiatives at work, from training new employees to working on high-profile projects. She even started brainstorming ideas for expanding the store's customer experience, knowing that her voice and ideas would be taken seriously. It was a refreshing change from the years of feeling invisible and dismissed by her family. For the first time, Fina felt truly seen by herself and her colleagues. She realized that she had been holding herself back, fearing judgment from people who weren't even willing to understand her. Now, she was ready to embrace the full potential of her career. Outside of work, Fina made an effort to surround herself with supportive friends who lifted her up rather than bringing her down. She reconnected with people who had always valued her, friends who celebrated her successes and encouraged her to continue growing. They didn't compare her to anyone, least of all her brother. She began spending more time with her old college friends, meeting them for coffee, dinners, and weekend hikes. It wasn't just about socializing, it was about reclaiming the space in her life that had been so easily taken over by her family's toxic influence, healing from the past. Though Fina had taken bold steps in embracing her independence and career, she knew the emotional wounds from her family's favoritism wouldn't heal overnight. The years of being overlooked, the constant comparisons to Liam, the dismissal of her accomplishments, they had left deep scars. But Fina was determined to heal, to redefine herself outside of their shadow. One of the first things she did was start journaling. Every morning, she set aside time to write about her thoughts, her frustrations, her triumphs, and her dreams. It became a cathartic ritual, a way for her to process everything she had been through. As she wrote, she found herself confronting the pain of being overlooked, the pain of feeling like she was never good enough in her family's eyes. But she also began to notice something incredible. She was growing stronger with each word, each sentence, each page. Her journal became a tool of empowerment, a place where she could acknowledge the hurt while also celebrating her growth. She wrote about her successes, her resilience, and her determination to never let anyone define her again. Fina realized that the only validation she truly needed was her own. For the first time, she allowed herself to be proud of what she had accomplished, knowing that her worth was not determined by her family's perceptions. As she healed from the emotional wounds of the past, Fina also took up practices of self-care that nourished her body and mind. She started taking yoga classes, finding a peaceful escape from the stress of her daily life. She made time to read books that inspired her and learned to enjoy moments of stillness, something she had never allowed herself to do before. Slowly but surely, Fina was rebuilding her confidence, piece by piece, and learning to love herself in a way she never had before. Chloe's growth. As Fina's own emotional health began to improve, she noticed something else. She was beginning to stop comparing herself to others. She had spent so much time in her family's shadow, trying to live up to expectations that were never hers to meet, that she had forgotten the power of her own uniqueness. But now, she saw the world through a different lens. She realized that comparison only stole her joy and stifled her potential. It wasn't just about her career, it was about living authentically, on her own terms. Fina's newfound sense of self started to radiate outward. She began to offer support to her friends, many of whom had faced similar struggles with their own families. She became the person they could lean on, the one who understood what it felt like to be dismissed, overlooked, and trapped by the expectations of others. Her journey of self-empowerment was no longer just about herself. It was about helping others find their own strength too. One of the most meaningful ways Fina shared her journey was by supporting her younger sister, Chloe, who had recently faced struggles with self-esteem and family dynamics of her own. Fina, understanding firsthand how damaging it could be to live in someone else's shadow, made a conscious effort to mentor Chloe. They spent afternoons together talking about their dreams, their frustrations, and their personal growth. Fina made sure Chloe knew that she didn't have to follow anyone else's path, that her worth wasn't tied to their family's expectations. She was proud of Chloe for who she was, not who others thought she should be. Fina's healing process wasn't just about overcoming her own struggles. It was about using her experiences to empower others. She found strength in sharing her story, in helping others see that their value was never defined by others' opinions. By confronting her past, Fina was able to help others confront theirs. And in doing so, she was creating a ripple effect of empowerment that reached far beyond her own journey. As the months passed, Fina's life became a testament to resilience and self-discovery. She was no longer trapped by the narrative her family had tried to impose on her. She had built her own story, one where she was the hero, not the afterthought. And as she continued to grow in her career and personal life, she felt a deep sense of pride in how far she had come. She had finally learned to define success on her own terms, and it had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. Fina knew there would still be challenges ahead, and her family dynamic would never be the same. But now, she was stronger, more confident, and more aware of her worth than ever before. And that, she realized, was enough. In the months following the Thanksgiving confrontation, Fina had felt the weight of her decision settle into her life with a mixture of relief and sadness. While her family had expected her to simply return to the fold, eager to sweep the uncomfortable truth under the rug, the reality was different. Fina was finally beginning to understand that no amount of reconciliation would ever change the toxic dynamic that had been entrenched in her family for years. She had drawn the line, and for the first time, she was fully committed to respecting her own boundaries. Her parents, particularly her mother, made numerous attempts to reach out. The phone calls came at first with soft, apologetic tones, followed by tearful promises of change. "Fina, we miss you. We're sorry for how things turned out," her mother would say, her voice trembling with guilt. "We don't want to lose you. Please, let's fix this. You know how much we love you." Each time, Fina felt a sharp pang in her chest, a flicker of guilt. But she quickly reminded herself why she had done what she had done. She had confronted her family because she needed to stop living in their shadow, to stop letting their invalidations determine her worth. Their love, as it had always been, expressed, was conditional, wrapped up in expectations and comparisons that she could never meet. Fina's father also reached out, though his approach was more pragmatic, lacking the same emotional weight as her mother's attempts. "Fina, we need to talk," he said in his deep, stern voice over the phone. "This family can't keep going like this. You've got to let go of the past and move forward." But for Fina, moving forward meant more than just pretending things were fine. It meant distancing herself from the toxic side of her family once and for all. She couldn't be manipulated back into a cycle of neglect and comparison. She knew this was the hardest part of her journey, the part where the people she loved tried to pull her back into their unhealthy dynamics. But Fina had learned that boundaries weren't meant to be crossed by anyone, even by those who claimed to love her. She had tried, for years, to meet their expectations and find a place where she could feel valued. But now, she understood that true self-worth could not come from external validation. It had to come from within. Fina began to limit contact, choosing not to engage in conversations where her family tried to coax her back into the fold. When her parents showed up at her door, uninvited, bringing her favorite food as a peace offering, she firmly told them that she needed space. It wasn't that she hated them, but it was clear to her that nothing would ever change unless they were willing to see her for who she truly was, not as an afterthought or a second-rate version of her brother. One evening, she received a text from her mother. "We miss you. Please come home for Christmas. It won't be the same without you." Fina stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the keyboard. The longing to return, to feel like she belonged again, pulled at her heart. But deep down, she knew that her absence from their lives was the best thing she could do for herself. She needed to stay firm in her decision, even if it meant continuing to disappoint them. "I'm not coming home for Christmas," Fina typed back, then paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I need to focus on my life, my growth. I'm finding my own path now. I hope one day you can understand that." She hit send and immediately felt the weight of the decision settle in her chest. This was the final break. There was no going back. Despite the sadness that often lingered after those difficult conversations, Fina had found a sense of peace she never thought possible. Her professional life had continued to thrive. She had earned a major promotion at work, overseeing a new branch of the retail store she worked for in a high-profile neighborhood of Manhattan. Her career was expanding, and for the first time, she felt the full power of her own abilities. She didn't have to hide behind the shadows of anyone's expectations. Her success was hers to define, not dictated by the narrow views of her family. At work, Fina gained the respect of her colleagues, who saw her hard work, dedication, and leadership qualities. She was no longer just the quiet woman in the background. She had become a force to be reckoned with in her field, and with each step forward, she realized that her worth was not tied to her family's opinions, but to her own achievements and values. Fina had stopped comparing herself to others, especially to Liam. She had spent so many years measuring her worth against him, her successful, well-put-together brother. But now, she had freed herself from that constant comparison. She no longer looked to anyone else for approval or validation. She trusted her instincts and followed her own path. Fina's transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. She learned to embrace her independence and to focus on building a life filled with people who truly cared about her. She spent more time nurturing her friendships, seeking out relationships based on mutual respect and understanding. No longer weighed down by the toxic dynamic with her family, Fina built a solid support system of people who celebrated her for who she was, not who they wanted her to be. Chloe, her younger sister, had been one of the first people to recognize Fina's growth. They had spent countless hours together over the past year talking, laughing, and supporting each other through their respective journeys. Fina had become a mentor to Chloe, guiding her through the emotional struggles she had faced growing up in the shadow of their family's favoritism. Chloe had also started to find her own voice, shedding the insecurities that had been imposed on her by their parents' narrow expectations. Fina realized that this was the true gift of her journey, not just her own personal growth, but the ability to help others around her do the same. The strength she had found in breaking free from her family's limitations had allowed her to empower those she loved, to help them find their own paths without the weight of comparison and judgment. As she sat at her favorite cafe one evening, sipping her coffee and watching the city bustle around her, Fina realized just how far she had come. She had fought hard for this life, for this peace, and she had finally reached a point where she could embrace the future with open arms. Her toxic family dynamic was now a distant memory. Fina knew that she had made the right choice by stepping away, by creating the boundaries that were necessary for her growth. She had proven to herself that she was enough, just as she was. The future ahead was full of endless possibilities, and Fina was ready to face it. She had done the hard work of healing, and now she could step confidently into whatever came next, knowing that her path was hers alone to define. Fina's journey of self-discovery and empowerment reminds us all of the importance of standing up for ourselves, setting boundaries, and no longer letting others define our worth. If you've found strength in her story, it's time to take your own steps towards self-love and growth. Don't let anyone make you feel small. If you resonate with Fina's journey, hit subscribe, share this story with someone who needs it, and leave a comment below about your own experience. Let's support each other in reclaiming our power. Your voice matters. Don't stay silent any longer. Subscribe now and start your own transformation today.